So this is the new all-electric Kandi K23 and K27. Wow.
It's a beautiful car. I love it.
Kandi is a Chinese-based company that received a decent amount of attention for its incredibly small and cheap vehicles. Most notably, they were advertising their model K27 for being as cheap as 10 grand after taking into account federal tax credit. Now, keep in mind, these federal tax credits are actually limited and they will run out. Previously, they stated this was only for the first 1,000 customers, but it seemed they removed that on their website. The stock had seen a massive run-up recently, and all of that was cut down in 3 days. It was a huge collapse. The reason for that is a lot of bad news has come out about the company. Hindenburg Research is a short-selling firm that has released several fairly detailed documents about companies they think are committing fraudulent acts or scammy or misleading investors about their actions. The exact things they highlight are accounting irregularities, bad actors, undisclosed related party transactions, meaning you have two companies really owned by the same people that you use to fake sales, things like that, illegal and unethical business practices, and undisclosed regulatory, product, or financial issues. One of the things that really put them on the map for many people was their short seller report on NKLA. They went through a lot of things talking about NKLA, all the massive issues, the fact that they had a truck they rolled down the hill and said it was in motion. They pointed out tons of irregularities. And NKLA really didn't have a good response. It was a standard thing of, oh, we think this is misleading and ridiculous, but they didn't really deny many of the claims in here. A lot of the things they said were true. And that report actually launched a lot of things. The DOJ is now investigating them. The deal they had with GM completely dissolved. Right now, it's basically just GM saying, hey, we'll sell you stuff if you want to buy it, and you have to pay for it up front. It's really shocking how badly that report just hammered into NKLA, and it hammered hard because it was pretty accurate. And if we look at NKLA stock, that report was released in September, and it has been on a constant decline, possibly going even lower and lower and lower. And Hindenburg does have an entire page about their track record. They go through all of the different reports they've released. They talk about NKLA, they talk about Wins Finance. Genius Brands was another huge one that they were very accurate on. They were calling it as a $1.50 stock. And they were incredibly accurate on that. They have really massacred a lot of companies, and they massacred them with facts. If this was just some random moronic Twitter post with no basis in reality, it wouldn't shift stocks as much as it has. But they've built a name for themselves, which is why when they release a report, you see companies drop 24% in a single day. And their latest report is covering Kandi. Their report goes into detail about fake sales, EV hype, and the idea that they believe Kandi is exploiting U.S. investors. Now, Kandi was actually a company I covered on my channel, and I had a fairly bearish take on them. You know, I generally try to avoid covering companies I think have no redeeming qualities, with one of the bigger exceptions being NKLA. I was pretty bearish on them. I saw the ads they were offering in the US, they were trying to get their name out there, but I wasn't convinced that their product would be a big seller in the US. Now, it's not going to be selling in the US for some time now. There's still a lot that needs to go on, but we saw a huge spike up in the stock price almost immediately after I made this video, and I took a lot of flack in the comments. Rather than be petty and go through and show all my arguments with people, I was pretty firm that I don't think this product would be a big seller. And we might have some EV euphoria, but when it comes down to the numbers, I think Kandi America, over the long term, we're talking a couple years here, is really not going to be compelling. They're going to bring this cheap vehicle to the market, and no one is really going to buy it. They're not going to make money off these vehicles, because the low-end market is an absolute nightmare to get margin from. You have to be a super giant company putting out tons and tons of vehicles if you really want to squeeze a lot of money out of it. And unsurprisingly, Kandi was losing money fairly consistently. I was actually really shocked with a lot of their sales, given the product they're providing. China is a developing country. It's developing rapidly. It's also a country where people are far more open to riding two-wheel vehicles. And I was kind of, I don't want to say skeptical because I bought their numbers for what they were. I actually believe in this video I say I don't think Kandi is an outright scam company. They're obviously producing stuff. They have factories. I just don't think their product makes a lot of sense or that they'll make a whole lot of money off it. But then again, they are partnered with a huge company like Geely. However, I do need to apologize in this video because there are a couple things that I missed. Like I said before, I saw a lot of their Kandi America advertisements, and that was the big thing that I was covering, what I thought of Kandi America and their products in the American market. I thought it would really not be a successful venture. But going through the Kandi report, there are a lot of very questionable things they seem to have done. Before getting into extreme detail, I want to say that Kandi has responded and said that this report does contain inaccuracies or that there's strongly worded opinions, they're not accurate, they're misleading, things like that. And that's fairly standard whenever a report comes out like this. Kandi said they will be doing a detailed review of the report and expounding on any of the errors and explaining stuff. So I'll make an update video when that happens. We'll see what they have to say. If it's like the NKLA update where they say, oh, this is full of errors, it's bullcrap, and then their refutement isn't really a refutement at all, I'll stand by and say I'm very doubtful of Kandi. But just because Hindenburg has a good track record so far doesn't mean that they're right on every single mark. And I don't want to imply that Chinese companies as a whole are scams or anything like that. There are really beloved Chinese companies out there like DJI. And Kandi has pursued certification from the EPA for selling their vehicles ahead of their 2020 distribution plans. They actually say that Kandi is taking part in a brazen scheme to falsify revenue using fake sales to undisclosed affiliates. If there's any truth to that, that is pretty horrific. Falsified sales, other things like that, that is cooking the books. That is really a horrendous thing to do. And they go into a lot of detail. The company's largest customer, representing 55% over the last 12 months, shares a phone number with a Kandi subsidiary, and they shared an executive with Kandi. And much of the report does kind of focus on this, how a lot of their customers are related to Kandi somehow or have links to them somehow. Some of it is speculation. Other things do involve a bit more detail. And this is something I do need to apologize on. In my previous video, I didn't realize that Kandi in China actually does have a bit of history with fraud allegations. Their public deal actually resulted in charges from the SEC, and there's court documents covering all of this. There's also a lot of questions with why their serving auditor has completely switched over, and there's a whole mess with auditors that have dealt with their company. A lot of these accounting boards have really had a nightmare dealing with Kandi, and they get a lot of info from these accounting boards and all the issues they dealt with when they were talking with Kandi. And apparently they tried to defraud the Chinese government, basically. They were making use of these subsidiaries for electric vehicles by pumping out tons and tons of these crappy little cheap cars no one really wanted, and then they just let them sit in a lot. The actual article they source is pretty crazy. There are just tons and tons of these vehicles sitting in lots unused. One thing that really struck me about Hindenburg especially is they've called out a decent amount of Chinese companies now, and it's very difficult to get information that is exclusively in China. The translations normally aren't that great, or it's not really served to an English-speaking market. There's a disconnect, and it really does make me wonder if there are one or more people at Hindenburg who are native Mandarin speakers or fluent in Mandarin, because a lot of this information can be very difficult to obtain and actually interpret if you're not familiar with the language. I speak a very small amount of Mandarin, but there's no way I could go through a lot of these sources in detail. And the report just keeps going on and on and on, talking about why they think a lot of Kandi sales are completely fabricated, which would be really horrendous because, as I said before, Kandi pretty consistently loses money. If they're fabricating sales and still losing money, they're really up poop creek without a canoe. A lot of the advertised sales, they say, come from a joint venture partner. And despite the elimination of their biggest customer, their revenue stayed stable with the help of unnamed mystery customers. And they do make good points about the company redacting the names of its top customers. It's almost like they're hiding something. There's a lot that goes on in the report talking about the actual facilities and addresses associated with the company, and really implying that Kandi's customers are Kandi, that they are in fact falsifying some number of sales. And one of the really shocking things that hit me, and maybe does explain why they went into Kandi America using this tiny little car that probably won't sell great in the American market, is that Kandi America might be part of their scheme to falsify more sales, which really show that, hey, their US branch, which is a part of Kandi subsidiaries, is buying Kandi products and then selling it back to Kandi. And they're making the claim that an undisclosed related party entity of Kandi America is therefore both a top customer and a top supplier to Kandi. And the report just keeps going on and on and on. If you're invested in Kandi or thinking about them at all, I highly recommend you read through the report, take a look at everything, try to deal with the evidence. Going through and looking at some of this, it's actually pretty shocking, the claims they make. If there's any truth to some of these, that really scars the company for me. I personally would never invest in a company that would participate in things like this. And we'll see if this spawns an investigation by the DOJ or Chinese authorities, because it looks like they've already been in trouble with the Chinese government before, and the SEC before. And there's a lot of concerns that are just across the board here. It's not just accounting, it's not just scheming in the past. It's a lot of times the numbers just don't make sense and seem to imply some sort of fraud or inaccuracies. And this isn't just bad for Kandi, it's also bad for a lot of stocks in the Chinese space. There have been tons and tons of criticisms of Chinese stocks and House bill efforts to delist them, although a lot of these bills typically involve their relationship with the Chinese government, whether or not it has influence over them. So it might not affect Kandi specifically, but there have been a lot of these Chinese companies which made a lot of money off American investors and then got hit with massive fraud allegations that ended up being true, or at least partially true. Luckin Coffee definitely comes in mind. They cooked the books and went from a $40 stock to a $4 stock. It's really just not making the Chinese sector look good, and I would not be surprised if more and more regulations happen because of things like this. If you get a lot of these companies pretty separated from the market, where they can do a lot of things and sort of cover them up or hide them from most Americans, again, not saying that this information is completely gone, but if original sources are in Mandarin or things like that, if it's difficult to translate information over and easier to hide when it's in a separate non-English speaking country. And there are huge tensions between the US and China. If things like this continue to happen, it could really be rough for a lot of Chinese companies, including the ones that are actually legitimate. I'm going to be awaiting Kandi's response. This is going to be interesting for me because my Kandi video is actually one of my most popular. People were really interested in the company, and there were a lot of people pretty angry at me that I was having a bearish take on them. I was of the opinion that there are much better EV stocks to invest in if you want to get into the EV market. Even better Chinese EV stocks if that's what you want. So I thought there were better purchases. We'll see how Kandi responds and how things pan out, but like I said, if any of those things hold true, I have serious doubts about the company in the long term. Sometimes it takes a while for a house of cards to fall, but if they are falsifying revenue, that is just not a company I can support in any capacity. But we'll see. They have their right to respond. We'll see what they have to say. If you're interested in getting into the market and using self-directed trading, a fantastic way to start is with Webull. If you sign up now, you can get 3 free stocks. I have a referral link in the description, and again, if you sign up, you can get a free stock valued between $2.50 to $250, and then you'll receive 2 other free stocks valued between $800 and $1,600 if you deposit $100 or more. There are no fees or anything with depositing money. You just get your stocks. If you're interested and want access to a fantastic trading desktop, mobile, and web application, just use the link in the description below.